All right. Welcome to the Monday, January 9th, 2023 Board of Education regular meeting. It is 7:27 and I would like to call the meeting to order. Mrs. Hageman, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Sebastian?
Here.
Mr. Elam?
Here.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Here.
Mrs. Donahue?
Here.
Mr. King?
Here.
Will you please join me as we say the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance All right, we're at number 2, agenda and minutes. So the first thing is to approve the agenda. Can I have a motion to approve tonight's, the agenda for tonight's meeting? Oh, I'm sorry. Are there any additions to the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess there are no additions at this time. If you remember them later, we can always add them. Can I have a motion to approve the agendas for tonight's the agenda for tonight's meeting?
I'll move.
Thank you, Mr. Elam. Can I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mrs. Mansfield. Mrs. Hageman, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Mansfield?
Yes.
Mrs. Sebastian?
Yes.
Mr. Elam?
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. Approval of the minutes. We have minutes from December 6th work session, December 12th regular meeting, and December 20, 2022 special meeting. May I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I'd like to make a motion to approve those meeting minutes.
Thank you, Mr. King.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mrs. Donahue. They were.
Did she not attach it?
Mrs. Hageman, will you please call the roll?
I'm sorry, you said Mr. King motioned, and who was the
Mrs.
second?
Donahue seconded?
My apologies. Mrs. Sebastian?
Yes.
Mr. Elam?
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. Public participation. Mrs. Hageman, do we have any public participation
We
for
do.
agenda items?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Beam, you're up first for our agenda items. Okay, so do you want to speak now, or do you just want to, what do you want to do? If you want to speak, please go to the microphone so you will be heard. Probably.
Okay, it's on now?
Yep.
Okay. I wanted to speak on something on the organizational meeting, because it said right here, there is time for public participation during the meeting as indicated, an agenda of hearing of the public. So there was no hearing of the public on the organizational meeting part.
That's correct.
So am I allowed to say anything about one of the items that was on the organizational meeting?
Yeah,
Or I'm not allowed to speak on that right now?
Yes, you are allowed to speak about that now.
Okay. It was on item J, and Mr. King did answer one of the questions, but it was highlighted in red, the $25,000 in general proposal service supplies and equipment, $50,000 for any constructional related. Is this an increase? Is this new? Is it highlighted in red because it's new?
No, if it's okay, I can answer that. We don't typically answer, but we had it that way last year, so we just carried it forward. It was one of those things we had a lot of discussion back and forth about last year, and I just don't think the formatting got changed. So that's not an increase, that's exactly what we've had for the last year.
So that was changed last year at this time, so you're just okaying that again?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, so we're okaying it for, even though we don't have a superintendent at this time, it is for the interim superintendent? This also grants this for him? Okay. I just know that, and this is just a comment on my own, that I just know that several of you up there tonight that was on the board that I helped campaign for, this was one of our concerns 4 to 5 years ago, was the leeway that the board give the superintendent and the treasurer, and that was something that we ran on, and that many ran on that the community does not feel that the superintendent and treasurer should have that amount of money as far as leeway in spending. And I just wanted to remind some of you that's up there on the board tonight that that was one of the main things that we helped campaign for, that we would try to not just give an open check to a certain amount, that they would have to come and ask for it. And that's just my comment on that J item.
Thank you, Mrs. Beam, for your feedback. Mrs. Reese?
Good evening, Board. I just have a couple of items on the agenda. One is in the classified staff section. The extra trip pay comparison chart shows schools that are not similar to us and includes city schools. City school districts typically have larger budgets due to commercial business tax revenue. Suburban and rural schools districts typically have a very low percentage of businesses. So if we remove the urban schools, Huber Heights, Northridge, and Riverside, from the comparison chart, the average difference in pay is $3.45, not $5.08. Adding the $3.45 to our current pay rate would bump it to $15.95. In addition, for the majority of the schools in the list, the trip pay is $3 to $4 less than the regular route pay. So that $15.95 falls squarely within this pattern, which was a $3.36 difference. I also would like to understand how the 1850 was established. Even using the $5.08 difference shown in the chart, it would raise the trip pay to $17.58, not $18.50. So what prompted the extra dollar, roughly? While I agree an increase is needed, a $6 hike, which is nearly 50% higher, is not reasonable. And we do not always need to be paying top dollar, we just need to be solid. I would hope that you would back it down from the $18.50 to $16.31. This is still over a 30% increase and is consistent with what other suburban schools are paying. Second item is the classified sub-rates, which is the next item, has the same text about the extra trip pay. I notified Tina about this, who I think is going to explain okay, so when we get there. In the certified staff section, I just have a question on the student teacher stipend. In the past, these have been something that we've received and are just passing on, so if you could just explain what's going to happen there. And last thing is, on the meeting conflict, I'm surprised that you would choose directly knowing. I just assumed you didn't know. Sorry for the interruption, but I'm concerned that you would pick a day that's in direct conflict with another community meeting, forcing the community to choose between the two.
Thank you, Mrs. Reese. Yeah, I'm getting there. Okay, Mrs. Hageman, will you cover the treasurer's report for us?
I keep forgetting to hit my button to turn it on, turn it off. Monthly financial report for December, as well as, so if we want to scroll, we can. I always have to sit to the side here. We have the bank rack, and then we can scroll down a little more to budgets versus actuals through the month of December. So we are seeing some big differences in some of the areas. So I'm going to have to keep a very close eye on it. As far as revenues, we're within 0.5%. So that's always good news. Unless it's more, then that's even better. But within expenses, we're looking at about a 2% swing, which is we're spending about 2% more, 2.18% more. I took a little more time to get the board reports together because I was trying to figure out what exactly happened there. And we are looking at a lot more in purchase service costs, just like we would in our regular home budgets. We've got a lot more coming, cost for just regular materials and supplies that we didn't see inflation. Nobody thought we were going to pay $5, $6 for a carton of eggs. So I'm going to keep a close eye on that and hope that that starts to level out a little bit. And we did have, a big swing at the beginning of the year when we had 200 unexpected kids. So we're still looking at that, but we are running about 2% more, which causes me a little pause, but I'll keep an eye on it, see where we end up. So if we want to scroll through all of those, because that's just pretty much for the month, we're pretty close to where we need to be. So we can scroll through. Thank you, Jacob. And then these are our actual collections. You can see that we collected $730,000 for the month of December, but we spent $2,167,000. We're hoping we get our tax money this month, and so we'll be okay again. So, and then this is the financial summary that explains all of those deficits and what in greater detail for anybody that wants to take a moment and read through those. And then we have all of our charts, where the money's coming from, and where the money is going. As you can see, 48.96 was the benchmark, what I expected to see in revenues received, and we're at 49.36, so not a big difference there. This is where our money goes, which is mostly salaries and benefits. If we keep scrolling, the benchmark for expenditures was 50.44, and we're at 52.62. So that sort of does cause me a little bit pause. 2% is a little higher than I like to see in a district this size. So if we keep scrolling, I think that's it.
Yep, that's it.
For the monthly report. And then you have the APCOM report, which is just to show, as you scroll through that, you see what we received in initial cash, and then what we received for the month, what we received for the year, and what we end up. As long as that final column is not in a negative for a total on each fund, you're not over appropriated. So that's why we want to include that in the monthly board report, because I know in past audits we've been over appropriated in certain funds. So this is a way for us to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And then our investments and where we're at for our COPS issue. So, we're currently receiving 2.4. Our current book yield is 2.426, which, if we remember a few months ago, it was less than 1%. So it's moving in the right direction. So.
Do we get that revenue in monthly, or does that only occur when we sell the bond?
No, we get a monthly revenue based on dividends that are in interest. So like for this month, for the month of December, I think we got $35,000. So, and interest and dividends that were paid. So.
Great.
And that's pretty much all I have under that. Next item is approval. Oh, which one did we go to?
Check register. Yep. And approval of new accounts.
Oh, okay, so we've got the approval of the amended certificate. Is that not on there? Okay. Of the amended certificate of available resources and appropriations resolution. Again, fancy way of saying what our amended certificate is, just our estimated revenues for each fund. And the appropriation resolution is the board's approval to increase appropriations as needed. Mostly on this appropriation report, what we're looking at is we added new funds. So I have to have your okay to increase appropriations by those particular funds, which was the 019, which if we go on later on in the board agenda, you'll see that we had 3 local grants added. So
There it is. Okay.
and again, it's just the AppCom that explains that we're not over appropriated in any fund. So.
And record again. Okay.
What's next?
Check register.
Detailed check register, right? So that's the checks for the month of December, most of which is payroll, since December was a short month for everyone. But as you can, so it shows all the checks that we cut for the month of December for your approval, and that's what will be then uploaded to the website for the treasurer's office. These are the 3 new funds that I need your approval for. 019 is a local grant fund, so we've gotten, our teachers and staff have gotten 3 grants, $600 for emotional support, $3778.04 for ceramics program, and $3224.51 for decodable books from the Tip City Foundation. And that's all I have for this month.
May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda for the treasurer's report?
I'll move.
Thank you, Mr. Elam. May I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mrs. Mansfield. Discussion? Mrs. Hageman, about in the 070, which is the capital projects, about how far along are we with our expenditures at this point? Are we about half done? Or is
I think we're about 35%.
35%?
Because even, the work takes, we've got about, I think it's a little over $500,000 held in retainage. So that's when they finish out, but it's not available to spend, right? So it's in the retainage account being held by Park National and earning interest, which was nothing before, a couple months ago, they started to see some money in that account, which is pretty much 8% of the labor cost, and that way we can make sure that our punch list gets filled and everything with the building is done before we release those funds. So
Okay,
we're
thank
doing
you.
pretty good.
Good, great. And I'd just like to say thank you to the Tip City Foundation. I know they sent a newsletter out last week or earlier or this week with that we received 3 grants, I believe, so that's a huge deal to our district. You can see the amounts up there. And thank you to the Title I teachers who applied, and I'm not sure who applied for the emotional support materials, but I know the Title I teachers applied for, I think it looks like about $7,000. Oh, that's ceramics, so probably the art teacher and the Title I teacher applied for some grants. So thank you to them for applying. Any other questions, comments? Okay, Mrs. Hageman, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Sebastian?
Yes.
Mr. Elam?
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. Next up is the superintendent's report. So Mr. Crispin, will you please drive?
Thank you. Good evening, Madam President. Congratulations to you and Mr. Elam on your ascension to our officer positions. We welcomed everybody back last week, and the staff started off with a professional development day. The highlight of that day was safety training, and actually was brought forward by Mrs. Brewer, and the turnover we've had in the district just made sense. We needed a refresher, and appreciate SRO Deputy McGuire setting that up for us. And from that, been great discussions and a heightened awareness and amongst the staff that was already pretty cognizant about keeping our students safe. So that was a good day of training for us. Important dates coming up between now and our next meeting. Tuesday, January 10th, we have a PTO meeting. That's tomorrow night, and that's in the Media Center. We have Friday, we have no school, and that's because we're ending the first semester, and that's a teacher workday. Monday, January 16th, no school in observation of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Wednesday, January 18th, we have the high school talent show, and I believe that's here in Bethel Hall at 6 o'clock. Tuesday, January 24th, we have the College Credit Plus meeting. Saturday, January 28th, the Mother-Son Fun Night. Wednesday, February 1st, begins the celebration of Black History Month. And then Tuesday, February 7th, is the Music Boosters meeting. Our enrollment is up a tick, but new in this month's communication is the actual. I had received several questions about where's your data coming from, and obviously it comes from EMIS, and when that gets put into this spreadsheet by our EMIS coordinator, Mrs. Mason, and then from that I condense it to the other chart. But this is the master report we look at monthly, and there's a breakdown within each grade level, each building, and some of our demographic groups. Lastly, January is School Board Recognition Month, and I have certificates of appreciation that I will share with you after today's meeting. But these certificates are presented to each of the board members in sincere appreciation for exemplary leadership and service to public schools, and each certificate is signed by the Christine Varwig, who's the president of the Ohio School Boards Association, and Richard Lewis, the Chief Executive Officer of OSBA. So I always thought it was curious that they made the month where folks get sworn in, and newly elected folks get sworn in, to congratulate them ahead of time, all the hard work and dedication they put in on behalf of students. So thank you all. And that is the January 2023 Superintendent's Report.
Thank you, Mr. Crispin. Can you move on to the classified personnel recommendations? Number 6.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so we received a resignation letter from Melissa Discat, and she's been an awesome aide for us, and I hate to see her go. And also recommending a hire of Gwendola Eisen to be a bus aide for us. The extra trip pay, appreciate our bus drivers, their persistence in bringing this issue forward to me, and after, I think I shared this with you all right before we went on break, but the comparison in the chart is with our schools in the athletic conference, the TRC. And why the TRC? Well, that's how our drivers get clued in that they were being grossly underpaid for extra trips as they're sitting at basketball games and volleyball games and football games, and learning that one driver's making 19 some bucks while they're making $12.50, and so I appreciate the drivers giving me time to get on CERB and indeed look at what it was. And so so the recommendation for $18.50 puts us in the top third of extra trip pay. And I thought that was, if you look at where our starting pay is, we're in the bottom third. Or about in the middle, but as our steps go, step 5, step 10, our drivers lose a little bit of ground. So rather than being in the bottom third, thought it might be a change for us to be in the top third in our compensation for our folks. So that's where we got the $18.50 from. classified substitute rates. You want to talk about that, Madam Treasurer?
Okay, so there, January 1st, 2023, there was an increase in Ohio's minimum wage. So it went from $9.30 to $10.10 per hour. So minimum wage in the state of Ohio as of January 1st, 2023 is $10.10. We had some sub positions that were only receiving $10 an hour. Looking at the fact that our minimum wage people went from $9.30 to $10.10, which is, 70, 80 cent an hour raise. We thought it would be, okay I propose that we give everyone on the sub list $1 an hour raise, considering we don't know what the Ohio minimum wage will be next year, but this will at least get us covered for 23 and hopefully 24. So those are my proposed rates. So secretary or aide sub that subs for us now gets $10 per hour. We're asking to pay them $11. The same goes for the cooks and the cashiers in the kitchen. Custodial subs will go from 12 to 13, and bus drivers subs from 14 to 15.
Thank you, Mrs. Hageman and Mr. Crispin. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda for classified personnel?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. King. May I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mrs. Donahue. Discussion.
I just had two quick things about the extra trip pay. I did hear the comment about, bus travel within our league, and I know Huber Heights technically isn't in our league, but I always wonder when we do these comparisons why we don't include Tecumseh, literally a few miles down the road, based on their size and their rural outlook as well. And for something especially like this, because they are driving quite a ways as well to some of their conference play. So, and just in general, when we do the comparisons, I notice they're typically not usually included in any of our comparisons. And just a suggestion, recommendation that we try to always include them as well. And then with the extra trip pay, if you included us in the column that has the $12.50, when you do an average of that column, it comes out to $16.85, which really still keeps us up in the top tier of the bus trip pay. And it's about, $1, not quite $2 less than what is being recommended, but just seemed more in line with some of the schools and the fact that some of those are big city schools that maybe we can't necessarily compete with just yet. And then it makes me think for the van drivers, I know that's not what this is about, but I think do we increase their pay earlier in the fall? Or did we look at just maybe some people who were coming on and what their pay was? I just wondered if this is going to go across to the van drivers as well eventually, or will that be something that we'll be looking at?
Yeah, I would have to pull that same information before I made a recommendation of any kind.
And Mr. Crispin, can you clarify for me? I hear what you're saying, Natalie, Mrs. Donahue. You mentioned, Mr. Crispin, something about trying to balance the later step drivers, step 5, step 10, that they're not as well compensated, so you're trying to balance that. It typically are trip pay offered to our most senior drivers first, or what's the order for that? Do you know?
It's a great question. I don't know what the practice is here, if there is a bidding or a rotation. Districts are different, so I'd have to
Okay, because
Can ask Mr. Fugate
yeah,
that.
okay. I was just thinking if we're trying, that it would, if most senior drivers are given that opportunity first, it's a way for them to kind of correct that inequity. Thank you, Mr. Elam.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
if you look at it isolated.
And I know it used to be that everybody had to take a turn through each season. That's how it
Yeah,
usting to be,
okay.
but yeah.
Yeah, I know there's a signing up process, and that's kind of what we were bumping into is folks were starting not to sign up for our trips.
Definitely.
But I'll clarify that with either Kathy or Brent.
So I kind of understood specifically on this trip pay that it was more than just a comparison of where we fell into the TRC bracket, but it was used as kind of the foundational piece is what the TRC was doing, as well as providing an incentive to ensure that we had volunteers that wanted to actually do the trips and to make it more incentivized for people to sign up. There was some difficulty in some of the trips where drivers didn't sign up to take one of the teams to an event in the last school year. So I thought that this was one of the strategies to help assist with that as well, to make it advantageous for the drivers to want to do it.
And additionally, I mean, we've obviously struggled for a while to get drivers in general. And hiring drivers, this may also be an additional incentive for people to want to work for Bethel. So,
All good points. Thank you, Mr. King.
And
Mrs.
many of our
Mansfield.
superintendents in the past have used the league to compare not just salaries, but other things in terms of eligibility and that kind of thing as well. Even if they're urban districts, they're still in our league.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Okay, Mrs. Hageman, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Mansfield,
yes.
Mrs. Sebastian,
Yes.
Mr. Elam,
Yes?
Mrs. Donahue,
Yes?
Mr. King.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. Mr. Crispin, will you cover the recommendations for certified personnel? Or Mrs. Hageman, whoever I should have asked. I
No,
apologize.
the first one, I would fall to me. When we hired Mr. Mullen as math club advisor, we placed him on step 0. And upon further investigation, he should have been placed on step 3.
Okay.
So we just need the board's approval to move him, because when we did the hiring initially, we had the wrong step.
Thank you. And then is student teacher stipend also you?
Yes, it's also me. We received a $50 payment because Mr. Spears hosted a student teacher from the university in which he hosted that student teacher. And so I take out the applicable employer taxes because we've got to pay retirement and Medicare on that $50 and pay the difference to the teacher. They're the ones that do the work, and it's $43.11.
Thank you for taking care of that. And then item C is just the monthly
Substitute list, yes. Yep.
from the ESC.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can I have a motion for approval of the consent agenda for certified personnel, please?
I'll move.
Thank you, Mrs. Mansfield. Can I have a second?
Second?
Thank you, Mr. King. Any discussion?
That was Elam.
Oh, that was Mr. Elam.
That was Danny that
Oh, I'm sorry,
seconded.
My mistake. No discussion? All right, then Mrs. Hageman, please call the roll.
Mrs. Sebastian?
Yes.
Mr. Elam?
Yes?
Mrs. Donahue?
Yes?
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. Business recommendation, whoever covers that, please start us
Yes,
off.
so we have a service agreement for the Montgomery County Educational Service Center for hearing and audiology services. And in B, we have an appreciation letter from our 2 teachers talking more about the decodable books and the grant monies they received to be able to purchase those. Just 2 items tonight.
Okay, thank you. Are these different from what was listed before? I'm sorry, I didn't catch there were 2 separate. Under the treasurer's report, I'll go back and check. Okay, can I have a motion for approval of the consent agenda for business items?
I'll move.
Thank you, Mrs. Donahue.
Second?
Thank you, Mr. King, sorry. The same for one of them, okay, thank you. All right, any discussion? Okay, Mrs. Hageman, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Elam?
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Yes.
Mrs. Sebastian?
Yes, motion passes 5-0. I have discussion, is that, oh, Facilities Committee. Okay, Mr. Crispin, would you like to read the Facilities Committee report?
Well, I'd like to, but I think it's, this is 8/8/22. Let me, yeah, we're a little far past that. T. Okay, here we go. This is the progress report for the 9th of January 2023. Masonry veneer installation continues in area 2 and 6. That is the dining room and classroom wing. Window installation continues to follow the masonry veneer installation. Metal stud framing work is ongoing in areas 8 and 9. Those are both classroom wings. Drywall hanging is ongoing in areas 7. That's the administrative area. And clinic. The drywall finishing work follows right behind it. Painting is well underway in areas 5 and 6. Also classroom wings. Ceiling grid installation is occurring in areas 5 and 6. The first load of casework is delivering today for areas 5 and 6. I know the teachers are really interested in seeing what that's all about. Installation starts right away, so hopefully we'll get a good peek at where we're going to be able to stuff. Yeah. Overhead mechanical and electrical work along with in-wall rough-in work is ongoing throughout as needed. The athletic field, aside from being very muddy, contractors will install the underground drainage for the turf field when that ground freezes. Anything that you'd like to add, Mrs. Sebastian?
The only thing I'd like to add, and this is really for next month, we looked a little bit at there's approximately $750,000 of contingency funds spread across all 3 buckets. Remember, there's 3 different buckets of contingency. And so Mr. Crispin and Mr. Bird are already working on a lot of this stuff, but we're going to figure out how much of that we need to allocate to chairs and desks and furniture, because we know we're not going to have enough totally to fill the new building. And then we need to determine what to do with the visitor side bleachers. The original plan had been to move those over, but due to their age and due to the fact they might not pass code if we move them, the thought now is to probably buy new. And then we also never allocated money for the elementary gym bleachers. So if there is sufficient contingency, those are the big 3 areas. And then we also have $52,000 I saw today in playground equipment. So they're looking at how to move that over to the new facility, and a little bit for landscaping. And was there anything else I missed, Natalie?
Mm-mm.
But we tried to talk through the big picture, the things we thought we really needed with that contingency money that's left. And hopefully next month we'll have a more finalized list, because they did caution us on lead times, particularly the furniture. It just takes 3 to 4 or more months, and they said you need to get it ordered. So those decisions should be coming forward in February and March.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it was honestly the shortest core meeting we've had in 6 months, which I think speaks to the management and how well things are going right now. 36-minute meeting. It was pretty impressive. So we'll hope that continues. Natalie, anything else that you want to add? Okay.
Madam President, we
I'm sorry, yes. Did we omit the BEA?
we did.
Okay. Mrs. Brewer or Mrs. Henry, would you like to say a few words, please? Mrs. Brewer. I really need you to
Yeah.
go over the microphone, otherwise it won't, I know from listening to the recording, nobody will hear you at home. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now? I just want to wish everyone a happy new year. Okay, 2023 is going to rock. Let's hope. And I wanted to thank you, Board of Education, for the fuzzy blankets. They came in handy. Minus 40 degrees in Cleveland over the holidays, so thank you very much. That was very thoughtful of you.
Thank you, Mrs. Brewer. And thank you, Mr. Crispin and Mrs. Hageman, for taking care of that, and your staff, because we were Santa Clauses that Friday, I think, before you left. I think Mr. Elam and I got to participate in that. It was a lot of fun. Okay, do we have public participation? Mrs. Beam.
Okay. I'm here tonight to discuss the resolution passed by the Ohio State Board of Education. I am aware you were sent this information prior to winter break from a parent, and that parent has not heard back from you. So I'm standing here publicly to ask you what your plans are to follow the guidance of our state school board. For those that don't know, the Ohio State School Board of Education on December 13th, 2022, passed the following resolution. Resolution to oppose the proposed changes to Title IX and to affirm parental rights and local control of Ohio K through 12 education. I would like to read a few excerpts from the resolution. Paragraph 3, proposed regulatory changes to Title IX that contradicted the plain language of the original law, illegal bypassed the legislation process, and undermined the very protections of female students that Title IX sought to provide. Paragraph 10, be it resolved that the State Board of Education declares its empathetic support for Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, considers the original and authentic meaning of the law to be a historical and continuing pillar in upholding the rights and opportunities of women and girls, and unequivocally opposes the proposed regulatory changes released by the U.S. Department of Education. And lastly, paragraph 12, be it further resolved that the State Board of Education calls upon the General Assembly to resist federal executive branch attempts to undermine the original intent of Title IX. The board urges General Assembly to safeguard the rights of parents, the innocence of children, and the rights, privacy, safety, and opportunities of women and girls in school and athletes. I would also like to bring up the fact that on December 30th, 2022, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the policy of Florida School District that maintains separate restrooms based on biological sex, ruling that it did not violate Equal Protection Clause of Title IX. I would also like to read a few quotes from the ruling in case you haven't looked into that for yourselves. First, the sex-specific privacy interest for all students in sex-separated bathrooms at school attached above doorways to those bathrooms swing open. The privacy interests are not confined to the individual stalls in those bathrooms, meaning girls are entitled to their privacy anywhere in the restroom or locker room, not just in individual stalls. The second quote from the 11th Circuit ruling is Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, but it expressly permits separating sex when it comes to the bathrooms and other living facilities. When we read sex in Title IX to mean biological sex, As we must, the statutory claims resolves itself. Title IX implementing regulations explicitly allows schools to provide separate toilet facilities on the basis of biological sex. Our bathroom policies has always and should continue to be based solely on biological sex. This does not single out any group of students, as all students are classified as either biological males or biological females. There is no discrimination. What a student prefers their gender to be does not reserve what their biological sex is. The community is also aware of a student being suspended for taking photos, videos in the middle school restroom. We have been asking for a year what safety you have placed in for our students in these co-ed restrooms. You have continued to ignore us. Now we have children being suspended for inappropriate actions taking place in the restroom. It may not be an assault like Loudoun County, but it still is an invasion of privacy. How long until not just pictures or videos? In the consequences of taking photos or videos by a male in the male restroom, it ended in several weeks of suspension. I would like to know what the consequences for biological male using biological female restrooms repeatedly is. It is more clear now that it was even a year ago that you as a board are making the choice to allow biological sex to commingle in the restrooms and locker rooms. You are choosing to waste taxpayer dollars to keep your heels dug in the sand instead of doing the right thing for our kids. As you can see, no amount of name calling, such as bigot, racist, homophobe, Nazi, hater, telling me to take my religion someplace else, intimidate me at school functions, or social media is going to shut me up or stop me from protecting all children at Bethel.
Time.
This community is waiting to hear what your actions you plan to take to realign our school
Mrs.
with the
Beam.
state attorney general and the state school board guidance.
Mrs. Beam, your time is up.
I'm done.
Thank you very much for
So
your comments.
you have not answered
Mrs. Beam, your time is up.
very well.
Okay, do we have need of executive session this evening? Okay, there's no need for executive session. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting, please?
I'll move.
Thank you, Mr. Elam. May I have a second?
I'll second.
Mrs. Hageman, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Sebastian?
Yes.
Mr. Elam?
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue?
Yes?
Mr. King?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. Meeting's adjourned at 8:15 p.m. Thank you for all your attendance tonight. If you could help us get the chairs, that would be great.